Hello guys, this is your friend Saiyan Nexus Audio Fanfic and we are back in new fanfic. What if Dragon Ball revealed Mr. Popo's lost daughter part 2? Christmas Eve. Puddin could barely contain herself. Tomorrow was the day. Christmas was so close she could almost taste it. She had events all planned out, presents were wrapped and hidden, the tree was ready to be set up in a minute's notice, and the dinner menu was all planned out. Dumplin had gotten back from his mission, but Puddin had been careful to keep her plans quiet so she could surprise him. She had absolutely everything ready to go. All with the exception of one thing. Tawa was again sitting on the couch, reading a book while sipping tea. Puddin had been standing in the hallway for almost a minute, trying to work up the courage to actually talk to her. The words she had spoken still rang in Puddin's earholes, and the pain they brought was still fresh and sharp. It had become hard to even look at Tawa since their last talk, and Puddin was not even sure she could go through with this, but the fact remained that she needed to go through with this if there was ever going to be the chance of them being a family. If it worked in the time chamber, maybe it could work again. Finally, Puddin squared her shoulders, took a deep breath, and walked into the room. "Hey Mo. Hey Tawa," she said. Tawa glanced in her direction before looking back at her book. "Hello Puddin," she said. "I was wondering if you were actually going to try and talk to me or just stand in the hallway all day." Puddin winced. "Right," she muttered, scratching the back of her neck in embarrassment. You know what tomorrow is, right? Christmas." "I suppose so," she said, looking up at Puddin curiously. "What of it? The day has not been of particular importance before." "Well, I was really hoping that we could all spend the day together," Puddin said, shifting anxiously. She realized her mistake immediately and struggled to recover. "You know, just maybe so you could spend it with Dad or something. I could leave you two alone, you know." Tawa just arched an eyebrow. Puddin felt a roiling in her stomach. "What I really want to ask is," she took a breath and started again. "What I really wanted to ask was if you could spend the whole day with us instead of going down into your lab." At that, Tawa closed her book and focused all of her attention on Puddin. Her spine was straight as a pole and her face showed nothing but irritation. Puddin felt her heart drop into the floor. "I can't do that, Puddin," she said firmly. "My experiments are both important and time-sensitive. I'm not able to just ignore them for an entire day." Puddin flinched, but pressed onward. "Then maybe just part of a day?" she asked. "Maybe at lunchtime, you could come up and spend the rest of the day with us. I know that Dad would love to spend some time with you." At a blank look from Tawa, Puddin winced. She'd asked directly, tried bargaining for part of a day, and mentioned Dumplin, but nothing was budging Tawa. With a swallow to moisten her throat, Puddin straightened up and played one of the last cards she had. "If you spend Christmas with us, I promise I won't bother you for the next year. I mean, I just want to spend some time with all of us together." Tawa glanced down and stroked her chin thoughtfully, but still looked doubtful. "I'm not sure," she said. When she looked up, however, she found herself struck by the full force of the Puddin pout. She couldn't look away from Puddin's trembling lip and shining eyes, no matter how much she wanted to. "Please, Tawa," she said. "Please please 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 please. Stop that," Tawa said weakly. Her will was crumbling. "Please," Puddin whined. Tawa snarled as she slammed her book down on the table next to her armchair. The table groaned in protest, but remained standing. "Fine. If this Christmas is so God's damned important to you and Dumplin, I'll come." Puddin flinched from the outburst, but there was a flutter of hope in her chest. "Thank you, Mo, Tawa. I promise that you'll enjoy yourself." "We'll see about that," Tawa said with a huff. Then she opened her book again and continued her reading. Puddin could tell she had been dismissed, so she left the room. She had to struggle to keep the smile off of her face, but the elation was tinged with worry. "Please let this work. The next morning 5 a.m. Puddin was setting up the house as quietly as she could manage. After dressing up in an appropriately hideous Christmas sweater and pajama bottoms, she was hard at work. She had brought the tree in and haphazardly hung a bunch of ornaments on it. She had also hung red and green streamers all across the ceiling and arranged presents under the tree. Originally there had only been a present for each of her parents, but when Puddin awoke, she found 3 extra presents that hadn't been there before. Must be that Santa person, she had thought to herself as she hung stockings close to the fireplace. She was just fussing with the tree lights for the 3rd time when she heard the sound of her parents' bedroom door opening. Dumplin blearily waddled into the room, his mouth open in a yawn so wide it seemed to take up his entire face. He rubbed his eyes before looking over the room and freezing. He rubbed his eyes again and looked around before his eyes landed on Puddin. "Merry Christmas," she said happily, dashing over to pick him up in a hug. He returned it enthusiastically. "Merry Christmas, sweetie," he said. He took a longer look around when their hug had ended, his face clearly showing he was impressed. "This is amazing, Puddin. I was just thinking we would need to have a low-key celebration, but this is fantastic. Hope you're in the mood for pancakes," said Puddin, bouncing over to where she had laid out all of the ingredients. "I'll get started on the batter if you cook the bacon." "Deal," he said with a grin as they both got to work. Puddin was just ladling some pancake batter onto a hot skillet when she looked at her father curiously. "Hey Daddy," she said, as Mom up. He let out a sad sigh. "She was gone when I got up," he responded. "She must have gotten up early to do work in the lab." "Like always. I thought so," Puddin said. "Don't worry though. I talked to her yesterday and she promised she would come out to spend time with us at noon." Dumplin hesitated for a moment before he gave her a smile that desperately wanted to be hopeful. "What do we have planned for the day?" he asked, awkwardly changing the subject. Puddin didn't think too much about her father's misgivings. She was too excited. "Well," she said, "we've got presents to open, but I want us to all be together for that. Your present, however, ties directly into one of our activities, so I know you'll enjoy that. Then I'm thinking cookie decorating, roasting chestnuts, maybe we'll fly around singing carols. I think there's a presentation of the Nutcracker Wars on Multiverse cable tonight, then we can have a snowball fight and make snow demons, then we'll watch It's a Wonderful Life on Space Netflix." She shrugged. "You know, basic stuff. So we'll do basically everything Christmas, huh?" Dumplin asked with grin. Puddin giggled and nodded. He laughed. "Sounds great. Can you open up the stove for me? Got a tray of bacon that needs cooking." After breakfast was cooked, Puddin and Dumplin sat down to a feast of golden pancakes and thick crispy bacon. Puddin filled her plate, drowned everything in syrup, and crunched on a piece of bacon. "So Daddy, how was your mission?" she asked. "Oi," he said, resting his cheek against his arm. "Had to keep Frieza from blowing up planet Earth again. Then had to hold Vegeto's hand while he fought Boo. Then I finished things off with saving Gohan's butt in the Cell games because the twerp tripped on a rock during that incredibly drawn-out beam duel." "More of the same, then?" she asked. "Gods damn it, yes," he said around a bite of pancakes. "When you start missions for the Time Patrol, you think you're gonna see weird and messed up things that could change the entire universe if they happened. Heck, maybe some things from the non-canon timelines. Unfortunately, that's not the case." He speared another piece of pancake with a bit more ferocity than was required. "It's always the same damn shit with the same damn idiots. Every stinking time I go out. You still kicked ass and looked damn good doing it, right Daddy?" "Oh, hell yeah I did." The demon god grinned at her, and she smiled back. "Good to hear. Hot chocolate, please and thank you." Time passed for the demon demi-goddess and her father. For hours, they just spent time together, talking about Dumplin's missions and about fun things they wanted to do. At Puddin's insistence, They roasted some chestnuts in the fireplace. In hindsight, Puddin decided they didn't taste nearly as good as she had been led to believe. All through this conversation with her dad, Puddin would keep glancing at the clock. 11:32. It was getting close. When her mom came out, Christmas could really start. She could barely contain her excitement. 12 o'clock. Tawa was going to walk out of the door any second. Puddin was so excited. The anticipation was killing her. 12:42. Puddin was starting to feel a little worried, but was trying to stay optimistic. Maybe her mom was just finishing something up. 1:34. Puddin's eyes were flitting from the clock to the closed basement door and back again. She looked at her dad, but he didn't say anything. 2:03. No, this isn't how things were supposed to go. It was supposed to be with the three of us together. It was supposed to be perfect. Puddin was out of her seat and across the room in moments, lifting a clenched fist to smash that door down if she had to. Her fist was an inch away from wooden surface before she stopped and took a breath. After centering herself, she gave the door a polite knock. "Mom," she called, loud enough that she was sure the occupant should be able to hear. "Mom, it's past noon. Are you coming out?" There was only silence. Puddin pounded harder on the door. "Mom, I know you're down there." No sound came up. "Mom," Puddin shouted, feeling prickling behind her eyes. "You promised me. You promised." Her fist slammed on the door over and over, but still, no sound came from the basement. No matter how strong her blows were, the door did not seem to show any sign of damage. Puddin gave the door one last hard hit before she leaned her forehead against the wood, trying not to cry. "She promised," she whispered. "She promised." A strong, yet trembling hand took hold of her shoulder and she turned to look at her father. His face was blank, but the twitches his mouth told a story. "I am so sorry, Puddin," he said. His voice came out strained. "You mother is. He couldn't finish his statement and just let out a hiss of air. "It's all right, though. We were supposed to have Christmas together," Puddin said. "And you and I will," Dumplin answered, rubbing her back in a manner that wanted to be comforting. "This doesn't need to ruin things for you, Puddin." He smiled at her, but it was an uncertain smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes and trembled at the edges. "We were supposed to be together," she sniffled. "We were supposed to be a family." Dumplin looked like he was about to say something, but he hesitated. After a moment, he pulled Puddin to her feet and gave her a hug. "Come on, sweetie. Let's do something fun together. What were you planning next?" "Well," sniffed Puddin, rubbing at her eyes, "what I planned first was in relation to your gift." Since, she trailed off, staring sadly at the floor. "Since Mom's not here, I guess we should go ahead." Dragging her feet behind her, she made her way to the tree, where she retrieved a wrapped cylindrical object and an envelope before handing them over to Dumplin. They both sat down on the couch as he carefully opened the envelope and took out the Christmas card. To his surprise, the card began playing music the moment he opened it. "Do you want to kill a planet? Come on, let's go today. We never kill things anymore. No blood, no gore. We'll blow them all away." The card only said, "Open the package. Merry Christmas. XOXO. Now looking very curious, Dumplin tore the wrapping paper off of the package to reveal, to his shock, a time scroll. He stared at it for a long moment before giving Puddin a flat look. "Would this," he gestured with the scroll, "imply that you've been sneaking into the time nest?" Puddin let loose one last sniffle and rubbed at her face before she straightened herself up and smiled at Dumplin, seeming like her normal self again. "My dear father," Puddin said in a prim voice, "I am shocked, that you would think such a thing about me." They had a staring contest for a few seconds before they both chuckled. "That's my girl," Dumplin said with a grin. "What does this scroll lead to?" "Well, it leads to a planet right before it explodes," Puddin said. I remember you complaining a bit ago that you don't get many opportunities to cut loose. I also found out that Christmas is on the same date as another holiday called Frieza Day, which people celebrate by blowing up planets. So, I did a little digging and found this one planet that blows up from instability in the planet core. It's called Krypton or something like that. Place where sciences and genetics are almost fetishized. That scroll will take us to the moment 35 seconds before the planet completely blows up. I was thinking you might want us to blast the place ourselves. She shrugged. You know, for fun. Sweetie, Dumplin said, the smile on his face growing bigger and bigger. This is the best Christmas, or Frieza Day, gift I've ever gotten. He gave her a tight, loving hug which she was only too happy to return. Well, he said, shall we get going? You bet, Puddin answered. With that, they both laid their hands on the scroll before a flash of light caused their living room to melt away. When the world righted itself, they were floating dozens of feet in the air, staring at the buildings of a large, futuristic city. Puddin almost fell to the ground before she remembered her ability to fly, managing to keep level with her dad as they both looked around. The city surrounding them was a bit of an eyesore. The sunlight coming through the black clouds gave off a light that honestly looked like the color of urine. The people below all wore skin-tight jumpsuits and capes, all emblazoned with a pentagon insignia filled with weird and unique squiggles. There was very little greenery to be seen around them, with the surrounding surfaces being made predominantly of metal and concrete. One aspect that actually made Puddin giggle was that every building surrounding them looked distinctly phallic, like hundreds of metal S jutting into the air. She didn't think overcompensation could exist on a species-wide scale, but apparently it did. Oh well, it wasn't going to matter for much longer anyway. The people in the city square below began shouting to one another and pointing upward at the two-time travelers. Someone was calling for the police while others looked like they were taking pictures. Puddin turned to her father with a smile. You wanna take this? Why thank you, sweetie, he said, turning downward to the populace. As he was opening his mouth, Puddin suddenly waved a hand to stop him. Wait, Daddy, she said. When he turned to look at her, she placed a pair of thick sunglasses on his face before putting another pair on hers. Ready now, she said, giving him a thumbs up. He turned back to the people below. Attention, inhabitants of Krypton, he shouted. Said a voice from the throng, it's actually pronounced crypt. Shut your face. Dumplin snapped. The voice went silent. Now, as I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, we are to inform you that all of you will meet your God. There were murmurs of confusion from below them. That sounds cool, someone said. Because we're sending you all to see him, said Dumplin. He paused a moment. Or her. I don't judge. Anyway, he held his hand out toward the planet's surface with Puddin mirroring his movement. This is God's judgment, motherers. Big Bang attack. Big Bang attack. Puddin shouted alongside her father. Two bright blue energy balls, with one looking a little lumpier than the other, flew from the palms of their hands and impacted the planet's surface, burning their way through the city streets and into the mantle of the planet. They reached the planet core within moments, detonating on contact with the already unstable core. The core, finally unable to contain itself, exploded outward with incredible force. The shockwave traveled up to the surface of the planet in less than an eye blink. The surface of the planet cracked and split before a fiery explosion burst forth, breaking each piece of the planet into countless smaller pieces and flinging them out to the far reaches of the cosmos as a blinding explosion took place. Dumplin and Puddin watched all of this with smiles on their faces as the fires of destruction raged around them. They barely felt the heat of the blast and the shockwave only shook them a little as they hung in place. The blinding light of the explosion was stifled by the sunglasses they wore. Eventually, the light of the explosion died down and Dumplin and Puddin were left floating in the emptiness of space. The spot where Krypton had been was now occupied by a brand new asteroid field. Dumplin took off his sunglasses and let out a long sigh. Ooh yeah, he said. That was just what I needed, Puddin'. Naya. Glad you liked it, Daddy, Puddin said happily, also taking off her sunglasses. Wanna head back? We can see about that snowball fight and caroling. Sounds good, he said. Holding the scroll out to her, she placed her hand onto it and they both vanished in a flash. When they reappeared again in their living room, Puddin saw that the world outside their house was much darker than when they had left it. She looked out the window and let out a sorrowful moan. What? She cried. Oh, come on. Conton City was apparently in the middle of a huge rainstorm. I heard it was supposed to be a snowstorm, not a rainstorm. Who the hell made it rain on Christmas? Grr. Must have been a mix-up at the weather office, Dumplin said, rubbing small circles on Puddin's back. It's alright, Puddin. I know you plan to do more things outside, but I'm honestly having a great day so far. But nothing's going right today, she whined. I had everything planned, but now. We're still here, Puddin, and I am having the best Christmas I've ever had. He smiled before floating up to kiss her forehead. Now, what should we do next? Puddin sighed again before she gave a small nod. Suddenly, her expression brightened again. Maybe I can go get a scroll that will take us to Ice Age or something, she said in excitement. Then we can have the snowball fight to end all snowball fights. Dumplin laughed, but shook his head. You've already stolen one scroll from the time nest. I don't think you should be pushing your luck to grab another one. He smiled comfortingly as Puddin deflated. Okay, Daddy, she said. She then gave him a smile. Wanna make gingerbread tentacle monsters instead? Lead the way, he said with another laugh. Puddin and her father spent many hours indulging in Christmas cheer. They made cookie monsters, decorated them, and then fought mock wars with them, with the casualties being sacrificed to sat the hungers of the dread god Puddinostros and the dump, eater of planets. Dumplin brought out a gift for Puddin, which was revealed to be a plush lantern from that monster show Puddin liked. She was pleased to find out that it was very nice to hug and cuddle. After that, the two of them watched some Christmas classics on Space Netflix. After a few back-to-back movies, not to mention the two of them having to spend half an hour crying after seeing It's a Wonderful Life, Puddin announced that it was time to get dinner ready. She had made the preparations the day prior, and now everything just needed to be cooked. Soon, the two of them were sitting at a table laden with succulent ham, seasoned turkey, fresh baked rolls, steaming mashed red potatoes and gravy, and the obligatory salad. They both were filling their plates as Dumplin was finishing a story. So, he said, I show up at Bulma's birthday party, and I see that Beerus is just about to eat a spoonful of pudding. Then, and I'm being completely serious here, Demigra possesses a ball to fly through the air and knock the pudding out of Beerus's hands. The guy gets so pissed that he immediately declares vengeance on the entire planet and tries to destroy everything. Over pudding, Puddin said incredulously. As Dumplin nodded, she collapsed over the table, shaking with helpless laughter. The sight of this was too much for Dumplin and he too began laughing. Their laughter was silenced by the sound of the basement door opening. Dumplin and Puddin turned to see Tawa emerging from her laboratory, stretching her arms over her head. I hope the food is on, she said, because I am absolutely starving. The room temperature noticeably dropped as Dumplin narrowed his eyes at Tawa. And where have you been all day? He said with a tight voice. Puddin knew that voice. It was the one he used when he was really mad. Tawa, however, didn't seem to notice as she started rubbing some kinks out of her neck. Down in the lab, she answered, as if it were obvious. I was monitoring the reproduction on a new batch of cells. Truly fascinating. Puddin could see the way her dad's hands were tightening into fists. This was not good. Why don't you sit down with us? Puddin said with a forced smile on her face. We've got a big meal to eat. It is Christmas after all. Oh yes, Tawa said, looking around the house at all of the decorations. I suppose the two of you would find that important. You'd probably find it important too if you ever acted like a part of this family, Dumplin growled. Oh no, thought Puddin. Tawa froze for a moment before matching Dumplin's glare. Her face was still a mask of cold indifference, but there were hints of anger in her eyes. I'm sorry, she said. I'm all the way over here. What did you say? I said you're more of a house guest than a family member at this point, Tawa, Dumplin responded, clearly not backing down. Hey, guys, Puddin said, trying to sound calm even though she could feel herself starting to sweat. Let's just hold on for a second. We're together now, it's Christmas, and we've got all this food here. Let's just relax and spend some time together, okay? Based on the expressions of both of her parents, they either didn't hear her or didn't care. Well, said Tawa, I deeply apologize for the fact that I am making scientific leaps that no one in your precious time patrol would even imagine if they had 1,000 years. Her cold exterior was cracking, revealing the rage bubbling underneath. Puddin said you promised you'd be with us today, Dumplin said. Yes, I did promise that, Tawa snapped back, her eyes burning. Then I realized that there was no reason for me to change myself if the two of you were running around up here being insane. This has nothing to do with me. It does have something to do with you. He snapped, slamming his hands on the table. Every plate jumped nearly a foot in the air before coming back down in a cacophony of clattering ceramics. I can't believe that you would refuse to be a part of your daughter's life. She is not my daughter, snarled Tawa. I never wanted a child to begin with, Dumplin. That didn't change when my miscalculation made one appear out of thin air. We don't even know how stable she is, or if she'll even last. For sake, she's part cat. You claim she's your pride and joy when she's nothing more than a glorified house pet. Puddin felt the words stab into her chest like knives. She couldn't move. Her lungs forgot how to work. Tears fell from her eyes as she struggled to remember how to breathe. What? She whispered. How dare you? Dumplin roared, shooting up out of his seat to float nose to nose with Tawa. You take that back right this instant. Don't blame me for only speaking the facts, dear, Tawa said severely. She's made from dead flesh and demon magic. No matter how much you try to tell yourself otherwise, she is not a true child. I don't care what you say. She's our daughter and nothing is going to change that. And here we are at the beginning again, Tawa snarled as she rolled her eyes. It's like arguing with a water wheel. Tears continued to fall from Puddin's eyes as she quietly pushed her chair out. Keeping her head down, Puddin slunk away from the table as Dumplin and Tawa started to shout louder and louder. She didn't want to hear this. She didn't like it when her parents fought. The first few times it had happened, she had hidden in her room and pulled the pillow over her ears, but her hearing had just gotten better the more powerful she became. She could hear their shouts through the walls and through her pillow now. Going outside was out of the question. It was still raining cats and dogs. She could already hear her parents' voices rising to a fever pitch and her fingers started shaking anxiously. She needed to find a place to hide, and fast. Then her eyes spied the door leading down to the basement standing ajar. She squeezed through the gap and started descending the stairs before her brain could even consider the possibility that this might be a bad idea. As she moved down the stairs, the shouts from the dining room became quiet murmurs to her. Tawa must have made some sort of soundproof charm for the room. The lights were still on down in the basement and she looked over all of her mother's experiments as she wiped away her tears. There were bubbling flasks, test tubes filled with multicolored liquids, and more books than she could possibly count. This is where I was born, said an errant thought as it flittered through her mind. The place had been cleaned since then, however, and she could see no trace of the mystic circle that had given her life. You were an accident, said a voice in her head that sounded a great deal like Tawa. A single mistake from me and I'm now stuck with you. You're nothing but a glorified house pet. A new wave of tears fell from Puddin's eyes as she curled into a ball on the floor. She lay there for a long time, quietly sobbing. All I wanted, she sniffled to herself. All I wanted, was for us to be a family again. To have Christmas together. She sobbed and rubbed her eyes. This is all my fault. If I wasn't here, they'd still be happy and, her words died as she continued to cry. Tawa, what's wrong? Said a deep, masculine voice. Are you alright? Puddin's head snapped up and her eyes darted around the room, searching for who could have spoken to her. She had been certain she was alone in this room, and the voice was one she had never heard before. A hint of movement in the corner of her eye drew her attention, and she focused on it. Resting on a cloth that was marked with dozens of arcane symbols, there was a palm-sized lump of pink flesh that seemed to have tiny yellow tendrils wriggling around. It was also pulsating at regular intervals, almost like a heart. For a reason she could not explain, Puddin found herself drawn to this curious object. She climbed to her feet and took slow, hesitant steps toward it until she was right next to the table and staring down at it. It started to beat faster. Tawa, the voice said again, is that you? You feel so different. Puddin stood there staring with an open mouth. That thing had just talked. That thing had just talked. Tawa, is something wrong? Said the lump. Puddin responded in the only way she was able. I.e., she screamed at the top of her lungs, falling backward on her butt and scrambling away from the talking lump. Ow, my audio receptors. The lump said. That just made Puddin scream louder. As her second scream ran out of air, she heard pounding footsteps running across the room above before the door at the top of the stairs was flung open with a bang. Puddin, she heard her father shout frantically. Are you down here? I, was all she could say, but it was enough. Her father came running down, taking the stairs two at a time. Before she knew it, he was kneeling down next to her and holding her by the shoulders. Tawa was coming down the stairs at a more sedate pace, glaring at the both of them with disdain. Puddin, are you okay? Dumplin asked, checking her over for injuries. And please explain what you're doing in my laboratory, Tawa said icily. I eagerly await your response, and if you have touched anything I will make sure you regret it. That thing just talked, she said, pointing a trembling hand at the pulsating lump. Dumplin and Tawa both turned to look at it and there was a moment where everything was still. Tawa was across the room in a flash. She balled up the cloth and the lump together, tossed it into an open drawer in the table, and slammed it closed before leaning on the table and crossing her arms, attempting to look nonchalant. Dumplin didn't buy it for a moment. Tawa, Dumplin said dangerously, what was that? Nothing important, Tawa said, not meeting his eyes. Don't give me that bullshit, Tawa. Dumplin shouted. I saw it. I felt it. You expect me to just ignore the fact that Mira is in my house? Puddin found herself scooting a few feet away from her father. She had never seen him so mad before. Mira, she thought. That thing was Mira. Why is he here, Tawa? Why? Dumplin demanded. Tawa just stiffened her posture and did not answer. Dumplin looked like he was about to shout again before his expression went slack. You haven't stopped, have you? He said in a voice barely above a whisper. You're still trying to merge the mortal and demon realms. Tawa, again, said nothing, leaving Dumplin to stare down at the floor in shock. You said you were done with all of that, Tawa. You said you wanted to settle down. Puddin could see her father's shoulders shaking. You promised me that. What do you want me to say? Tawa snapped. This is about my people. Your people, if you are so arrogant to call yourself the demon god. The mortals had their chance. We would make things better. We can work together. Please, Dumplin, I need your help. You can forge the perfect world for Puddin to grow up in. When did you start caring about Puddin? Dumplin roared, making the walls shake. Tawa closed her mouth with an audible click as Puddin let out a small squeak and moved away from her father. Dumplin seethed where he stood. How dare you say that? He snarled, but his volume had slightly lessened. After all those horrible things you said about Puddin, don't you even try to tell me any of this could be for her benefit. Dumplin, Tawa said, listen to me. This is the right thing to do. It's the ONL. Stop, Dumplin said, glaring hard at her. Just stop. He stood there panting for a long moment before his eyes fell to the ground again. If you won't stop all of this and let Puddin be a part of your life, then I won't let you be a part of mine. Tawa blinked in surprise. What are you saying? She asked quietly. There was a long and tense silence before Dumplin spoke again. Get out, he whispered. Tawa looked shocked. Dumplin, you. Get out, he shouted, still not raising his eyes. There was a moment when Tawa and Dumplin just stood there, frozen. Tawa looked like she was about to say something before she straightened her posture and her face became like stone. She snapped her fingers. A suitcase suddenly appeared in her hand before she opened it and held it out in front of her. As Puddin looked on, every single item in the laboratory rose up and flew toward Tawa before shrinking and falling into the suitcase. Even the tables and the door to the time chamber were taken away. When the room was entirely bare, Tawa snapped the suitcase shut, made a staff appear out of nowhere, and climbed the stairs. Dumplin stood frozen in the middle of the room, not even daring to look up. Not another word was spoken between them. At first, Puddin had watched this exchange with a sense of detachment, unable to fully comprehend what she was seeing, but the sight of her mother ascending the stairs with suitcase in hand finally spurred her to action. Mom, wait, she called, scrambling to her feet and running up the stairs. Her movement finally brought her father out of his stupor. Puddin, no, he said as Puddin climbed the stairs, but she didn't listen. By the time she reached the landing, Tawa was already halfway out the door. Mom, no, don't leave. She ran after Tawa as the woman walked outside the house into the rain. Puddin hesitated at the entranceway for only a moment before swallowing her fear and running out into the downpour. Puddin, come back here. She heard from behind her. She kept going. Mom, please. Tawa gave only the barest glance over her shoulder before she continued walking. Puddin ran down the path, reaching out to grab her mother's arm. If she could stop her, they could talk about this. They could all sit down and work this out and then they could all be a family. Just like they always should have been. Mom, Puddin said, managing to get close enough to grab Tawa by the arm. Before Puddin could say another word, the world fell away. It was like she was in freefall, but was somehow also standing still. Something like wind pulled at her, but she kept her hold on Tawa's arm. After another heartbeat, the motion suddenly ceased and Puddin found herself on solid ground. She stumbled slightly, losing her grip on Tawa's arm in her attempt to get her balance back. When she looked up, Tawa was staring at her with an almost scandalized expression. They were no longer in Conton City. It looked like a city on some version of Earth, except that it was entirely ruins. The sky above was dark and cloudy, with a moaning wind blowing across the broken terrain. Mom, Puddin said through her dry throat, reaching toward Tawa again. Can we just talk a bit about? Smack. Reflex kicked in and Puddin jumped back a step, one hand pressed against her lightly stinging cheek. She blinked rapidly, trying to comprehend what just happened. Tawa was glaring at her, holding her hand close to her chest as if it stung. Don't ever touch me, she said, her voice hard as flint. Before Puddin could say another word, Tawa vanished. Puddin didn't know how long she stood there. She was frozen, the last sight of her mother burned into her mind. Mom, she weakly asked, her voice almost lost in the sound of the wind. Mommy. No answer came. Then, like a puppet with its strings severed, she collapsed to her knees, pressed her palms into the dirt, and sobbed. Big fat drops fell from her eyes as she bit her lip, trying to stifle the sounds she was making. Her body shook from head to toe, almost as if she were heaving. She was barely aware of anything at all. The only thing she could hear was the echoes of Tao's words ringing over and over again in her ears. "Come back," Puddin said to the wasteland. "Please, come back. Just my luck I get the Christmas graveyard shift." Punosa sighed as she trudged up the stairs of the time nest, already praying to any god in existence for a drink. Her friends had originally invited her to a late-night Christmas party, but she had apparently drawn the short straw of life and gotten scroll monitor duty for tonight. Now, instead of enjoying margaritas and spending time with her friends, she would only have the time scrolls to keep her company. Even the sight of the tree above the time nest, decked out with Christmas lights and ornaments, wasn't enough to lift her spirits. "Why can't we just let the cadets do this?" she grumbled. "They're the bottom of the pecking order. They should be exposed to the lamest part of the job early. But no, we gotta have some of our best and brightest patrollers and teachers waste their valuable time just watching the time scrolls gather dust whenever Chronoa goes off to have a tea party or something." She shook her head again as she reached the top of the stairs. "There had better still be some leftover margaritas when I get," she froze and tensed. "Wait, why is Evelyn on the ground?" Punosa stared down at the motionless Namekian who she was supposed to relieve. Instead of manning his post, he was sprawled across the entryway of the time nest. She could see the steady rise and fall of his chest, not to mention the large welt on the side of his head, so she didn't worry about him too much as she stepped over him. She was much more focused on the sounds of movement coming from inside the time nest. Calling a small energy ball into her palm, she crept through the entranceway and into the time nest. The room was an absolute mess. Dozens of discarded time scrolls were scattered across the table, not to mention what looked like 100 scrolls lying all over the floor. Punosa was just raising her hand to her scouter to call this in when she saw the culprit in all of his neon-colored glory. "Dumplin'," she said in surprise, allowing her energy blast to dissipate. The demon god jumped in surprise when she spoke, dropping the armload of time scrolls he had been carrying. "Punosa, what are you doing here?" "I'm here for my shift on monitor duty," she said, her eyes narrowing. "What are you doing here?" Dumplin hesitated for a moment before he glared at her, bringing his fists up into a fighting stance. "I need these scrolls," he said. "Puddin's in trouble. If you try to throw me out, I will hurt you." "Puddin's in trouble," Punosa said in surprise. "What happened?" Dumplin blinked in surprise before he shook himself and explained. "Puddin tried to throw a Christmas celebration for us, but Tawa refused to be a part of it. Tawa and I had a fight, a really bad one, and it got so bad that I told her to leave, so she packed up her stuff and marched out the door, and before I knew it, Puddin was chasing after her, and the moment Tawa teleported through time, Puddin got dragged with her." Dumplin's voice had become more and more frantic as time went on, building to a higher pitch. He was even starting to hyperventilate. "Now Puddin has been gone for hours and I don't know where or when she went, so I gotta see if I can find her in the time scrolls, and I am really freaking out because Puddin is alone and scared in a place and time she doesn't know about, so I need to find her right now." Punosa stood frozen for a moment before she strode over and grabbed Dumplin's shoulders to make him look at her. "Dumplin, you need to calm down," she told him. He looked at her in surprise before glaring at her. "Who are you to tell me what to do?" he demanded. "And how am I supposed to be calm when my daughter is lost in space and time?" "Because you won't do her any good if you whip yourself into a panic. You need to relax, breathe, and focus, okay? This isn't a goddamn Tai Chi class, Punosa," snapped Dumplin. "This is my daughter we're talking about." Punosa just narrowed her eyes at him. "Remember what happened in age 547. We need to do this properly so we don't waste time worrying." Dumplin finally seemed to be starting to calm himself before he stopped and looked at her in confusion. "We?" he asked. "Of course," she said as she let go of him. "I'm not just going to leave my favorite student hanging." She turned and walked toward another shelf of scrolls. "You focus on that shelf where you are. I'll look through the scrolls over here." She turned over her shoulder to look Dumplin in the eye. "Don't worry. We'll find her." She started looking through the shelf of scrolls, trying to make some semblance of reason out of Chronoa's insane filing system, and soon heard Dumplin pick up his dropped scrolls and start looking through them. For almost an hour, they passed the time in silence, focusing all of their attention on searching through the time scrolls for any sign or hint of Puddin in it. Punosa had combed through the events having to do with dogs section and the robots are cool section and the Docus everywhere section when she came across a scroll in the Earth really sucks section that had the faintest whiff of purple coming from it, showing that there was a minor break in the timeline. Feeling a tiny spark of hope rise in her chest, she pulled out the scroll and rolled it open. Her eyes widened. "Dumplin, over here." Dumplin was at her side in a flash, trying to get a good look at the scroll in her hand. He gasped when she tilted the scroll to show him the image. The scroll showed a ruined city, with clouds of dust and refuse drifting across the cracked pavement. The both of them saw Puddin, curled up in the fetal position and sitting against the burnt-out husk of a building. "Puddin!" cried Dumplin, almost tearing the scroll out of Punosa's hands. Punosa had just enough time to put her hand on Dumplin's shoulder before he used the scroll. The both of them were consumed by a bright flash of light and the world fell away. When the world came back into focus, they were both standing on top of one of the ruined buildings that were still standing in the middle of the expansive hellscape. Dumplin immediately took to the air and started looking frantically in all directions. Punosa took to the air as well and started looking around. Within moments, they saw Puddin, just as the scroll had shown. "Puddin!" Dumplin cried. Puddin's whole body jerked in surprise before she looked up at the two of them flying toward her. Daddy," she whimpered. Dumplin hit the ground at a dead waddle run and threw his arms around her. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered into her ear. "It's okay. I'm here now." "She's gone," Puddin sobbed as she buried her face into Dumplin's shoulder. "Daddy, she's gone." "I know, Puddin," he said, his voice sounding on the edge of tears. "Everything is going to be okay, Puddin," Punosa said as she landed and took a knee next to the father and daughter. Puddin looked up at her in surprise. "Master Punosa," she asked, "what are you doing here?" "Helping your father look for you," Punosa said as if it were obvious. "We had a bit of a scare when you went missing. We should probably be heading back now." She nudged Dumplin's shoulder and he gave a small nod before pulling out the scroll. "Let's get you home, sweetheart," he said softly. He activated the scroll and they teleported back to the time nest in a flash of light. Punosa stood up, but Dumplin and Puddin stayed as they were for a long time before Dumplin sighed and looked up at her. "Punosa, I need to ask a favor," he said. "What do you need?" she asked. "Can you take Puddin home and keep an eye on her? I'll stay here and clean things up. It's my mess, after all." After a moment of thought, Punosa nodded. "As long as you vouch for me to Chronoa," she said as she scooped Puddin into her arms. Puddin didn't seem like she was aware of anything at all, and didn't even acknowledge who was carrying her. "Let's get you home, kid," Punosa whispered to Puddin. She turned on her heel and walked out of the time nest, stepping over the unconscious Evelyn and leaving Dumplin kneeling in the middle of the mess of scattered scrolls. After a quick flight to Dumplin and Puddin's house, Punosa pushed through the slightly ajar door and took in the look of the house. The decorations, lights, and Christmas tree were still giving off a look of Christmas cheer, but it now seemed hollow and soulless. A large dinner sat on the dining room table, barely eaten and stone cold. A fire had been burning in the fireplace, but there were not even embers now. The ajar door had let in the chill of the earlier rainstorm, so now Punosa swore she could see her breath in the air. I should probably put you to bed, she said more to herself than Puddin'. As she started carrying Puddin' toward the bedrooms, Puddin' suddenly grabbed Punosa's shoulder, making her stop in her tracks. What's up, Puddin'? She asked. Puddin' looked sheepish for a moment before focusing her wide eyes on Punosa's. Can I stay here with you? She begged. I don't want to be alone. The look of heart-wrenching despair on her face alone was enough to make Punosa instantly comply. Okay, Puddin', she said with a nod. I won't leave you alone. She lay Puddin' down on the couch and draped a blanket over her, which Puddin' immediately pulled around herself and cuddled up in. The next order of business was to get the fire going again to chase away the chill of the rain. Once the fire was burning, she knelt in front of Puddin' and rubbed her shoulder. I'm gonna clean up what's left of dinner, Punosa said. If you need me, I'll be right over there, okay? Puddin' blinked at her for a moment before clutching the blankets closer. Toss it, she said weakly. What? Throw it away. I don't want to see it again. With a sigh, Punosa nodded and went to her task. She stole a few bites as she threw everything away and it was actually quite good, but she understood why Puddin' wouldn't have any desire for leftovers. When the dinner was cleaned up, Punosa checked on Puddin' again and found her blankly staring at the floor. It made Punosa's heart break just to watch. I need to find some way to cheer her up, she thought to herself. After a bit of thought, Punosa smiled as an idea came to her. She walked into the corner of the kitchen and made a call on her scouter. It rang 4 times before someone finally picked up. What? Snapped the male voice on the other line. She smiled. Hello, Pata, she said. There was a pause on the other side. Master Punosa, do you have any idea what time it is? Pata's tone had lost its bite, but there was still a lot of confusion in it. I do, and I'm sorry about waking you, but this really can't wait. Something in her tone must have gotten through to him because he sounded much more awake the next time he spoke. What's wrong and what can I do? Pata asked. Tawa left the city earlier tonight, and it doesn't look like she's coming back. I'm with Puddin', but what she really needs right now is a friend. Could you possibly come over? There was a long pause before Pata spoke again. I'll be there as soon as I can. With that, the connection went dead. Punosa nodded to herself and was just turning back toward the living room when there was suddenly a knock at the door. She blinked in surprise. You have got to be kidding me, she said to herself as she answered the door. Pata stood on the porch, panting hard. He looked like he'd dressed in a hurry and he carried a duffel bag over his shoulder and a large thermos in his hand. Sorry, I took so long, he panted, stepping into the house. Had to make the soup right. Punosa could do little more than blink at him in silence as he moved to the living room and saw Puddin' curled up on the couch. Hey, Puddin', he said gently. Puddin' turned to look at him and her face brightened a bit. Pata, what are you doing here? I came when I heard you needed a friend, he said with a smile. He unscrewed the top of the thermos and poured some of the soup into the cap. This is some soup I made for you. It's a family recipe. I hope you like it. He carefully handed the soup to Puddin' and she took a delicate sip. Her face brightened even more and the soup was gone in moments, leaving her holding the empty cap toward Pata while looking at him with wide, begging eyes. He chuckled before refilling her cap from the thermos. Puddin' took another sip of soup, thankfully consuming it slower now, as Pata lifted the duffel bag into his lap. What's that? She asked. I figured you'd need some cheering up and I knew this would be the best way to do it. He opened the duffel bag to show that it was completely filled with DVDs of Warrior Pegasus Princess. So, which season do you want to start on? I've always been partial to season 3. Puddin' stared at the DVDs for a moment before giving him an incredulous look. Really? Season 3. When they were right in the middle of the network writers' strike and had only 2 weeks to write an entire season. It's got some of the weirdest episodes in the entire show. But it also has some of my favorite episodes in the entire show, so it balances out, Pata said with a smile. Puddin arched an eyebrow before giving him a smile. How about we start at season 2 and make our way there? I wanna see the pandemonium arc. Behold, the lady speaketh. He said dramatically because he was just that dang supportive. Pata pulled out one of the DVD cases near the bottom and popped it into the player before turning on the TV. Punosa, not really seeing anything else to do, sat down on the other couch and made herself comfortable. By the end of the second episode, Punosa was genuinely enjoying herself as Princess Moonbeam and her loyal knights fought to defend their kingdom. More importantly, Puddin was looking much better than when Punosa and Dumplin had found her. Within the first few minutes of turning on Warrior Pegasus Princess, she was already giggling at the on-screen antics and cheering during the fight scenes. The girl quickly polished off Pata's soup and had become much more animated as she interacted with Pata. It was refreshing to see her acting like her old self again. A few more hours passed and Punosa started to see the outer edges of dawn creeping over the horizon. She frowned at the time display on her scouter. Sure, the time nest had been left in a state of disarray, but Dumplin couldn't be taking that long to clean things up, right? Humming to herself in thought, Punosa stood up, getting the attention of the two young adults. Pata, I need to ask you to stay here with Puddin for a little longer. I'm going to go see what's taking Dumplin so long. Send me a message if either of you two needs anything. Okay, Master Punosa, Pata said with a nod. I hope you find Daddy, Puddin said. Punosa smiled at the two of them before she let herself out of the house. At the end of the path through the yard, she took to the air and flew toward the time nest. When she arrived, she was actually quite confused to find the time nest spotless, but empty save for a dozing frost demon who was on monitor duty. There was no sign of Dumplin at all. She flew to the top of Recreation Plaza and looked out over the city. The city was only just now beginning to stir, and even that was lessened with the likely high number of hangovers that were going to make up the coming morning. Still, there was no sign of Dumplin's signature neon color scheme. Punosa stood there and pondered for a few moments. She had gone out on a few missions with Dumplin in the past, but she hadn't really sat down with him in a long time. Not since she decided to become an instructor instead of an active time patroller, anyway. Her thoughts turned back to the times that she, Dumplin, and a few other Majin time patrollers would get together to drink, talk, and have some fun. She blinked. She now had a good idea where Dumplin was. Flying to the mushroom forest to the north of Canton City, she found a small establishment tucked away under a particularly wide mushroom. It had a few flickering signs that proudly declared it to be Liren's place and had the bar's motto in smaller neons. We live, we die, we drink again. Punosa stepped through the door, ringing the little bell as she did. The place was mostly deserted, with no one there to enjoy the quiet jazz flowing out of the old jukebox. A Namekian bartender was cleaning glasses behind the bar and gave her a polite nod as she walked in. Punosa sighed when she saw the object of her search hunched over the bar, 3 empty bottles of whiskey in front of him and a glass in his hand. She crossed to the bar and sat down next to the demon god before leveling a scathing glare at him. Dumplin didn't even acknowledge her as he took a drink from his glass. I thought I told you to look after my daughter, he growled as he lowered the glass again. She's fine. She's spending time with Pata right now. They're watching cartoons. A hint of wistfulness crossed Dumplin's face. Pata's a good kid, he said before drinking again. Punosa nodded. He is. He's decided that the best use of his time would be to help raise the spirits of a person he cared about, unlike you. She saw Dumplin's fingers tighten around the glass. You won't even let me mourn? He asked, glaring at the wall behind the bar. Punosa rolled her eyes before pointing at the 3 empty bottles. I think you've mourned enough for one night, Dumplin. Besides, I thought you gave up drinking when you decided to be a family man. And look where that got me. He snapped, slamming his glass on the countertop. My wife just left me, for s sake. Yes, she drawled. Your wife who happened to be a maniacal demon scientist who you've had to stop from destroying the universe once already. Her eyes narrowed. Cry me a river. Dumplin sat up straight for a few more moments before he slumped forward again. I loved her, he almost whined. Punos's expression softened and she patted his shoulder. I know you did, Dumplin, but you can't forget the rest of the world right now. Yes, you just lost your wife, but Puddin just lost her mother. She needs you right now. She needs her father. And if you really must mourn, then you should mourn together, because shutting yourself away from her and drinking yourself into a stupor is not going to solve anything for anyone. She took a breath and saw that Dumplin was finally looking at her. You have a daughter that thinks the world of you. She sees you as her hero. You need to go home and be her hero. The bar was silent. The jukebox had gone quiet, as if it had recognized the gravity of what she was saying. Even the bartender had stopped polishing the glasses and was trying very hard to look like he wasn't listening. Come on, Dumplin, Punosa said softly. You're the demon god. It's time to stand up and let the world know that this won't knock you down. Finally, Dumplin sighed and nodded before putting down his glass and getting down from his stool. He tossed a few extra bills on the countertop before both he and Punosa walked out of the bar. I can fly home on my own, he said quietly. You should go home and get some sleep. Punosa nodded. Do you know what to say to her? She asked. I've got a good idea, he answered with a nod. Then good luck, she said, giving him a smile. We should get together again sometime. It's been way too long since we've talked. Yeah, that sounds good, Dumplin said with a nod. With that, they both took off and flew toward their homes. Dumplin quietly opened the front door of his house to see Pata and Puddin together on the couch watching the ending of an episode of Warrior Pegasus Princess. At the sound he made, they both spun to face him. Puddin's face immediately brightened as she caught sight of him. Daddy! She cried happily, vaulting over the couch and running up to give him a hug. He wrapped his arms around and squeezed her tight, trying to convey without words how much he loved her. When they stepped away from each other, Dumplin smiled at Pata. Thanks for looking after her, Pata. I owe you one. No problem, Dumplin, Pata said with a smile. Happy to do it. Dumplin nodded and gave Pata a look, trying to give him the message that he wanted to talk to Puddin alone. Pata apparently got the message because he nodded to him and collected the things he had arrived with. I should probably be heading home now, he said, stopping to give Puddin a tight hug. I'll see you tomorrow, Puddin, but don't hesitate for a moment if you need my help with something, okay? Okay, she said with a small smile as she returned the hug. Pata gave them one last wave goodbye before leaving out the front door. Dumplin and Puddin both gravitated toward the couch and sat next to each other while holding hands. I'm sorry, Puddin, Dumplin started. I should have been here to comfort and take care of you, but I ran off instead. I'm so sorry. I know, she said, rubbing his shoulder. Her face looked pained, but she was trying to smile at him. And it's okay. Really? No, it's not. Really? Dumplin responded. You're my daughter. You come first and I should know better than to just assume I'm the only person hurting. He sighed. This was a really shitty Christmas. Yeah, I guess so, Puddin said with a nod. They sat in silence for a very long time. You know something, Puddin, Dumplin began. I've spent the last few hours wondering to myself about what to do now, and I still don't know. For the longest time, just being with you and Tawa was my dream, but I'm not quite sure what to do now. Well, Puddin said, giving her father a small smile, it's like one of those earthling quotes I heard. When one door closes, try breaking down another. We can make some new dreams for ourselves. Her smile widened. I'll start. Okay. Mine is to become a master class time patroller and to be the strongest fighter ever. She gently elbowed him in the side. I'm gonna end up being a better time patroller than you someday. Hey, keep dreaming, sweetie, he said with a chuckle. Puddin stuck her tongue out at him. What about yours? She asked. To be a good father to you, he said before Puddin flicked his forehead. Ow, he said, rubbing the spot on his head. Puddin was giving him an unamused glare. That's a cop-out, Daddy, she said. What is your dream? What do you want to happen for yourself? Dumplin looked at the wall and thought back on his life. He remembered the times before being a part of the Time Patrol in his early days as one of their members. When he had his answer, he smiled. Puddin noticed. What is it? She asked. The same dream I had when I first came to this time, he said. My dream, Puddin, is to be standing there amongst this world as it burns, the smell of ash and death in the air, on a mountain of broken bodies. His smile turned evil, with shadows seeming to instinctively crawl down to shroud his face. And the true payoff is the look on the survivors' faces when they finally realize that their hero, their savior, has been working against them the entire time. And like that, he was back to normal. Puddin blinked at her father for a few moments. That's dark, she said before a smile spread across her face. But it also sounds amazing. I like it. Dumplin smiled back and held her close. The coming days would be hard for them, and it was unknown what the future would bring, but Dumplin was quite sure of one thing. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The morning had come to Conton City, as well as a new school day at the Time Patroller Academy. Students of all shapes, sizes, and colors flocked through the gates of the academy, prepared to learn even more about what it meant to be a time patroller and defend the very timeline itself. And then there were some who were dragging their feet, knowing the lectures would leave them bored out of their skulls. Daly was most assuredly in the latter group. The male earthling yawned as he walked the last few streets to the academy, scratching the back of his neck as he went. He'd been up late playing duty calls with his buddies and had barely gathered the energy to leave his apartment. He tugged at the collar of his school uniform and readjusted his bandana, reassuring himself that he could at least catch a few winks during class. When he turned the last corner before the academy, however, he froze. No way, he said to himself. Standing right outside the academy front gate, dressed in a school uniform, was that demon girl. His vile nemesis, Puddin. It had been a long time since she humiliated him at that baseball game. Since then, Daly had thought about her often and about the great vengeance he would visit upon her. Finally, he would have his chance. Daly ducked back behind the corner and peeked out, watching her closely. The girl in question was standing in front of the gate, but she made no move to enter. If anything, she looked like she was stuck in place. She even looked like she was trembling a little. Daly smiled. This is perfect. She's clearly distracted. If I defeat her right now, I can prove that I am truly the superior fighter at this school. Everyone will fear my power. Daly smiled at the thought. She'll be completely demoralized and humiliated. She might even give up on being a time patroller entirely. The hell is he doing here? While Daly had been plotting to himself, Pata had arrived at the school gates and came up behind Daly's nemesis. Pata had a small smile on his face as he reached Puddin's side. Hey Puddin, he said. The girl didn't move. With a look of confusion, he slowly reached out to her. Puddin. The moment Pata put his hand on Puddin's shoulder, she let out an ear-splitting yowl and leapt nearly 20 feet in the air. As she came crashing down to the ground, she was panting, almost hyperventilating, as she turned to stare at Pata. He stood there with his hands on his hips, giving her a flat look. A little high-strung, are we? He asked. Puddin sheepishly looked at the ground and shuffled her feet. She looked kind of cute when she did that. Daly grit his teeth, suppressing any thoughts relating to considering Puddin cute. Sorry Pada, she said. I'm just a little nervous. You know, first day of school and all. Pada gave an understanding nod. This is big for you, I know, but it won't really start until you actually walk into school. Yeah, Puddin said, blushing a little. Okay, I think I'm ready. Together, they crossed the threshold of the school gate. Daly darted forward, taking cover behind the gate and watching them as they made their way down the path to the front door. This isn't so bad, Puddin said, looking a little less nervous. Maybe this is going to go just fine. At that moment, a hoverbike crashed straight down into the grass in front of the school and deposited a green-haired earthling male dressed in an unkempt school uniform out onto the paved path. He rolled across the ground before landing in a sit and shaking his head to dislodge a small cloud of smoke and dust that had clung to him. Oh god damn it, thought Daly. Why did it have to be Cray? As soon as the new arrival caught sight of Pada, he practically teleported to the Saiyan and grabbed him by his jacket. Tell me you saw it, he said, looking frantic. Saw what, Cray? Asked Pada. There were two ladies on the space internet. Daly had to stop himself from slamming his head against the school gate. This idiot was so goddamn stupid. That's called, said Puddin. It's been there since the dawn of time. No, shouted Cray. These two were famous. For what? Asked Pada, despite looking like he wasn't really looking forward to an answer. For being so goddamn stupid. This time, Daly did slam his head against the gate. For a moment, Daly was distracted. That was the moment when Puddin made her move. Look, she shouted, pointing off to the side of the school. An obvious distraction. Where? Said Cray, looking in the direction she had pointed. Daly also looked in that direction, but there was nothing there out of the ordinary. A student named Tarip was indulging his hobby of flipping off the giant dragon in the sky, but that was nothing new. When Daly looked back, Puddin and Pada were gone. He blinked. He blinked again. Damn it, he roared, slamming his fist into the grass. She'd pulled the wool over his eyes and slipped right out of his hands. Truly, she would prove herself to be a cunning foe. Luckily for Daly, he only had to wait another 2 days before he crossed paths with Puddin again. It was the start of timeline studies, which was right before lunch and his favorite class to nap in. He was quite surprised to walk inside the classroom and see Puddin sitting eagerly in the front row. He gritted his teeth and was about to scream out a challenge at her when the teacher strode in and ordered them all to take their seats. Now, class, the teacher, an old and wrinkled Namekian, said, we will be talking about the various alternate timelines and time warps you will have to contend with when you become full-time patrollers. The challenge, however, is knowing what does and does not need to be fixed. Daly was only half listening to the teacher drone on and on. He was focused on Puddin, trying as hard as he could to defeat her through sheer thought. Why was she just ignoring him like this? Mr. Daly, said the teacher, jolting Daly back to the present, could you please explain to us the difference between a canon timeline and a non-canon timeline? He stammered. One of them has more cans. Anger burned in his gut as students began to snicker around him. The teacher sighed. That was, actually, no, Mr. Daly, that was not close. Not close whatsoever. I suggest you read the homework twice tonight to make sure it gets through. He turned to the rest of the class. Does anyone else know the answer? Instantly, Puddin's hand was in the air. Yes, Miss Puddin. A canon timeline is what we associate as the normal flow of the universe as the Z-Fighters battle against threats to Earth, she said with a smile. A non-canon timeline, however, is made up of changes in the timeline that have naturally reached a state of balance with the canon timeline. These are including, but not limited to, the invasion of Earth by Lord Slug, Goku's battle against Cooler, and that entire Brawly debacle. It's not part of the canon timeline, but it won't throw the universe out of whack if it randomly pops up. Excellent answer, young lady. Most excellent. He turned to the rest of the class. Make sure you make note of that. Non-canon timelines can be seen as a benign time warp that doesn't put the universe at risk. By now, Daly was shaking in his seat, his teeth grinding together in rage. Suddenly, he slammed his palm down on the desk and shot to his feet. You think you're smart, he bellowed. As the class jumped at his outburst, Puddin only gave the barest of glances before turning back to the front of the class. Look at me when I. Mr. Daly. That is enough, shouted the teacher. Leave my classroom. Daly grimaced but did as he was ordered. He glared at Puddin as he walked past, but his nemesis didn't even look up as exited the room. When he was out in the hall, he smiled to himself. Ha, she's so intimidated, she can't even look me in the eye. My victory is assured. Son, you need to stop talking to yourself, said the janitor at the end of the hall as he mopped the floors. Daly ignored him and leaned against the wall. As time passed, Daly decided that now would be the perfect time to prove his superiority in combat. He would challenge Puddin as soon as she emerged from the classroom. With his plan in mind, he stood against the wall and waited. He didn't move a muscle for a whole hour. When the bell finally rang and the students began filing out into the hall, he stayed in place. All he had to do was wait. Any moment now, Puddin was the last person to leave the room, no doubt sucking up to the professor, and she started walking down the hall. Her eyes skated right over him as she went on her way. He stalked after her, managing to make it a few steps and opening his mouth to call out his challenge when. Puddin, hold on. An instant later, something slammed into Daly and sent him skidding across the floor and into a wall. Whoops. Sorry kid. Daly looked up to see Master Punosa standing where he had been. The Majin instructor was dressed in her normal ninja garb with a bag hanging from her shoulder. She turned from him and faced Puddin. How are you today, Puddin? She asked. Doing good, Master, Puddin said with a smile. I think I'm really getting the hang of things and I'm doing well in my classes. Great to hear, Puddin, Punosa said with a smile. She reached into her bag and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bento box. I made you a lunch, Puddin. I want to make sure my favorite student gets nice and strong so she can be an awesome time patroller. But I made my own lunch, protested Puddin. I've seen your lunches, kiddo, Punosa said with a smile. They're about 3/4 candy. You need real food. Puddin, looking a little crestfallen, nodded and took the bento box. Thank you, Master Punosa, she said, managing a small smile. Hey, wanna come eat lunch with me? Punosa asked with a grin. I'm about to go eat with my friend Tano. You can ask about her time patroller missions. Tano, asked Puddin with stars in her eyes. As in Commander Tano of the Tano Force Tano. You bet. Naya, I'd love to, cheered Puddin. The Magians departed, with Puddin bouncing down the hallway before turning around the corner. Daly lay where he had fallen and growled to himself. One day soon, Puddin, he swore. One day soon. Daly crouched down behind a brick wall encircling a cafe. He had woken up early today to ambush Puddin on her way to school. He had also chosen this exact spot because it was on her route to school. This time he wouldn't allow pesky students or pesky school officials to interrupt his battle with his rival. This time she would acknowledge how much stronger he was than her. Another waiter came over in a pathetic attempt to take his order, but Daly growled and made shooing motions at the waiter until he left. Daly's eyes never left the street. He would be ready this time. At last, at exactly 33 minutes and 27 seconds after 7 o'clock, he saw Puddin come around the corner at the end of the road. She was now only 3 blocks away. As soon as she came close, he would lunge from his hiding place and take her down before she knew what hit her. He smiled as his foot began to tap in excitement. There is no way this could possibly fail, he thought to himself as he readjusted his orange bandana. Puddin is mine. Just then, the sound of a whirring engine came from somewhere nearby. He blinked in surprise before looking around in confusion. There were no cars on the road. Where was the noise coming from? Daly finally thought to look up. Unfortunately, he was too late. Crash! A large green time machine suddenly landed on top of him, making the surrounding bricks and concrete crack and buckle. It came to rest before the glass dome opened and a strange figure jumped out. He was a member of the Frieza race, but there was something odd about him. Something almost gooey about his body. His horns were small black spikes atop his armored white cranium. He wore black pointed shoes, billowy white pants, a red spandex shirt with a white armored plate, and bright pink gloves with a neon green wristwatch. There was also a sword sheathed across his back. He looked around the street, his face looking panicked. What year is it? He demanded of the various cafe patrons. They were all so surprised by his sudden appearance that they all just stared at him. He grabbed at his horns in such a way that would have been hair-pulling if he had any hair to speak of. When he looked toward the market plaza, however, he froze as he stared at the giant statue of demon god Dumplin. Only one statue. He breathed. His face suddenly became panicked again. Crap. Too far. With that, he jumped up into his time machine and revved up the time engine. In moments, the device had vanished. It left behind some smashed bricks, a shallow crater, and a severely bruised Daly. Ow! He whimpered. That moment, Puddin walked past the cafe. She smiled and hummed to herself as she continued her way to school, blissfully unaware of what had just happened. Daly moaned as he slowly dragged himself out of his crater. First he had to deal with interfering students, then it was interfering teachers, and now it seemed that the universe itself was conspiring against him. No matter, he said to himself as he managed to start crawling down the sidewalk as people stared and made way for him. I'll have my battle. I'll have my vengeance. It's just a matter of time. It was a Saturday afternoon as Daly crept through the bushes of the suburban area of Conton City. Keeping an eye out for any security cameras, he made a dash forward out of cover before flattening himself against the wall of a house. He smiled to himself as he began to crawl along the side toward a nearby window. Finally, this was a plan that would work. It had to work. The house in question was the home of Dumplin and Puddin. After his disastrous attempt at ambushing her on her way to school, he thought that it made much more sense to challenge her after school hours. He could knock on her door, or maybe kick it down if he was feeling dramatic, and challenge her to a battle. It would be over in moments, and he could hold his head high knowing that he was the most powerful fighter in the city. He reached the window and carefully peeked inside. He had a view of the kitchen and a tiny bit of the living room beyond that, but there were no signs of life. A second glance, however, showed there were moving shadows on the wall of the living room. There was definitely someone in there, but he needed a better view. He lowered himself back down and continued creeping along the side of the house. He could feel his excitement growing as he came closer to the window. This was the moment. He could feel it. When he reached the window, however, he hesitated. He could hear an odd sound from inside. It sounded like panting, as well as creaking. He inched forward and peeked inside. On the couch in the living room, there was a large blob of something. The formless mass was shifting around as well as expanding and contracting at a rapid pace, almost as if it were breathing. It looked vaguely like someone had mixed together scoops of slightly melted Earl Grey and strawberry ice cream. He strained his ears, trying to hear any more sounds from inside. Oh, yeah, like that, right there, ah. Daly felt his face start to heat up. He had spent enough private time on the space internet to know what those sounds were. But, how? What? How? Suddenly, the lock on the front door clicked, causing the blob to freeze and the sounds of pleasure to stop. The door creaked open, allowing demon god Dumplin to walk inside and flick on the light. He looked at the panting blob and froze. Puddin'? He asked. With a slurping sound that almost turned Daly's stomach, the blob separated into Puddin' and Cupcake. Both were staring at Dumplin' and neither had a stitch of clothing on them. Puddin' blushed dark gray and grabbed a nearby blanket to cover up. Cupcake, meanwhile, seemed to feel no such inclination and just smiled. "Hey Dumplin'," she said. "What's up?" The demon god said. "Daddy," squeaked Puddin', suddenly looking anywhere but him. We were just, Stop," Dumplin' said, closing his eyes and holding his hand up to stop her. Puddin' fell silent. "Just answer a few questions for me. Question 1. Are you both doing this because you want to?" After a moment, they both nodded. "Good. Question 2. Is anyone getting hurt by you two doing this?" They both shook their heads. "Good. That's all I needed to know. I don't need to know anything else. I don't want to know anything else. If you'll excuse me, I am going to find a barrel of water to shove my head into and scream for a while. Good day, ladies." With that, he closed and locked the door. There were a few long moments of silence. Suddenly, a pair of yellow arms took hold of the back of the couch. A yellow Magian, equally as the other two, crossed her arms on top of the couch and rested her chin on them. "Well," said Captain Tano, "that was awkward." Puddin' let out a loud groan as she covered her face and curled into the fetal position. "Oh my God, I want to die," she wailed. "He's never going to be able to look me in the eye again." "Puddin', this is your dad we're talking about," said Cupcake, who honestly looked like she was enjoying this a little too much. "He's the demon god. If anyone's not likely to judge you, it's him." "My life in this city is over," Puddin' moaned. "I'm gonna need to move to an apocalypse Earth just to get away from everyone." Cupcake and Tano shared a look. "I think we need to distract Puddin' from her problems, Tano," Cupcake said. "I reckon we do, Cupcake." Together, the two Magian girls managed to roll Puddin' into an upright position, where Tano grabbed her hands and held them firmly against the couch. Before Puddin' could give a word of protest, Cupcake started tickling her, filling the room with high-pitched laughter. Eventually, the tickling stopped and the interactions became much more sensual. Daly didn't like this. He didn't like this at all. His eternal rival was in there, and he was out here. He hated watching this, but he found himself unable to move from his hiding place. He simply stayed frozen where he was, watching what happened inside. "Ahem," said a voice behind him. Daly's hair stood on end before he cautiously turned. Dumplin' stood behind him, glaring angrily while drumming his fingers on his crossed arms. "What in the 15 hells do you think you're doing?" He sounded calm. Scary calm. "I," said Daly. "I thought there were only 9 hells. I made 6 extras," said Dumplin', grabbing a fistful of Daly's shirt. "Would you like a tour?" I'd prefer not," Daly whimpered. Dumplin's eyes narrowed as a circular black portal opened in the air right behind him. "Too bad," said Dumplin before he turned and heaved Daly into the portal. Darkness, death, pain, despair, mimes. These were the only things surrounding Daly. His agony was unending, his consciousness infinite. He didn't know where his body ended and his mind began. Pain was life. Life was pain. He begged mercy from the uncaring void. He confessed his sins to the silent gods. Nothing changed. There was only torment, only darkness. His world burned. His world froze. His world became nothing. He became nothing. He was surrounded by grass. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was light behind his eyelids. The first attempt to open his eyes blinded him, but his eyes soon adjusted, allowing him to recognize his surroundings. He was in the bamboo forest of Conton City, on the other side of the city from Dumplin's house. He allowed his hands to skate over the grass, marveling at their softness and how they didn't burn his flesh from his fingers. For the first time, he truly felt at peace. Did we learn a lesson? A voice asked. Daly looked up to see Dumplin staring down at him. It was awful, Daly rasped. His mouth was dry from endless screaming. It never ended. My agony was the equivalent of 1,000 times 1,000 deaths. An eternity of torment has. You were only in there for 8 seconds, interrupted Dumplin. What? 8 seconds? Dumplin said slowly. And you got off lucky because I'm not in the mood to do any lasting damage to you. Be warned, though, if I find you peeping on my daughter again, I'll leave you in there for an hour. Clear. Daly stared blearily at him before giving a small nod. Clear. Good, said Dumplin. Like that, he was gone, leaving Daly alone in the forest. I want my mommy, he whimpered. The setting sun seemed to set the sky aflame as it dipped below the horizon. The roof of the school building was turned a bright orange as Daly stood in the center. His back was ramrod straight. His eyes were closed. His breathing was even. His arms were crossed. While the previous experiences had been traumatic and painful, they had only made him stronger. They had been the crucible that reforged him into an unstoppable force. He would not be denied his destiny. Today was the day. This time, his challenge would be assured. This time, nothing would go wrong. Any moment now, he murmured to himself. The roof access door creaked open, drawing his attention. Puddin walked out onto the roof before giving Daly a strange look. A sheet of paper with pronounced fold lines was grasped in her hand. Puddin tilted her head quizzically at him before lifting the note and reading. To my eternal rival, the time has come for our fated battle to finally commence. No more shall the universe drive us apart, and no more shall we ignore this fire of battle between us. Meet me on the roof of the school at 7 o'clock and we shall end this dance for good. Sincerely, your nemesis. She glanced up at Daly for a moment before looking back down at the paper. P.S. You smell nice. She gestured with the message. Yours, I presume. Indeed, Daly said, uncrossing his arms. At long last, my great and worthy opponent, we shall have our climactic showdown. One will show themselves as the superior warrior, and the other shall show themselves to be nothing more than a pretender. He shifted his feet, dropping into a martial arts stance. Now, we face each other, to put this glorious rivalry to a close, once and for all. What say you, vile nemesis? What say you now? Puddin blinked for a long moment before ing her head quizzically to the side. Who are you, again? Daly felt something break inside of him. His arms fell to his sides and he dropped to his knees. He felt a lump travel up his throat. All attempts to hold it in were useless and he burst into gushing tears. You, sniff, you don't even know me? He asked between sobs. Puddin, looking more than a little uncomfortable with this situation, shook her head, sending Daly into another bout of sobs. But I was so sure, I thought that fighting you would. Hey, now, Puddin said gently, taking a knee next to the crying man. It's okay, she soothed, rubbing his shoulder. It's okay. Daly let out a few hiccuping sobs before he looked up at her, tears still streaming down his face. You're okay, she said with a smile. No, I'm not, he whimpered. Of course you are, she said. You're training at the greatest combat school in the entire universe, preparing for the most important job in the cosmos. We're crazy strong already, and we're only going to get stronger from here. It makes no sense to have a climactic showdown before we even reach our peaks, right? I guess so, he sniffled. See, she said, beaming. You are okay. And now you need to promise to get even better at being a time patroller. What do you say? Daly took a few deep breaths before wiping his eyes of any remaining tears. I say, he swallowed. I say that I will work hard to become as strong as I can. I say that I will become a powerful and decorated time patroller by the time we face each other. Puddin smiled, and for a moment it seemed as if the entire world became brighter. Daly's heart fluttered. And I promise to smash you into the ground when that time finally comes, Puddin said. She gave him another pat on the shoulder before standing up. I need to head home, actually. Dad's making a macaroni casserole seasoned with the tears of young children. I definitely can't miss that. She lifted off from the surface of the roof and waved to him. See you later at school, she said with another smile before flying away. Daly knelt on the roof for a few long moments. Slowly, he lifted a hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat. It was slower now, but he knew what he had felt. My heart flutters when I am close to her, he said quietly to himself. When she is close, the world seems brighter, more happy. He lifted his eyes and stared at the setting sun. Can this be rivalry? For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind. Bah ha 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 ha. The evening calm was shattered by deep, roaring laughter. Confused, Daly looked in all directions, unable to find the source. Then he thought to look up. The sky dragon to the north was laughing at him. Ha ha ha, yeah, kid, it said through its laughter. It raised a giant claw to wipe at his eyes. That's exactly what rivalry is like. Hoo boy, are you right? Ha ha ha, ah. It turned its glowing gaze toward him and gave a smile with teeth the size of skyscrapers. Thanks, Pipsqueak, I needed that. Go ahead and laugh. Daly shouted up at the dragon, you would never truly understand. He put a hand to his heart and gave a small smile. For the sake of my rivalry with Puddin', I will train twice as hard and twice as long from now on. He laughed and thrust his fist into the air. I will become an eternal rival truly worthy of her. That is my vow as a time patroller. My vow as a warrior. There was a pause for a few moments before the sky dragon seemed to smirk and nod at him. Well, then, it said, I guess you better get to work, kid. With his spirits soaring high, Daly nodded to the dragon before he made his way home and crawled into bed. You better get yourself ready, Puddin', he said with a smile as his eyes closed. I will make sure that our battle will be legendary. Author. This is a parody of a parody of a parody. Parodyception. Boom. Draw gone souls. Dumplin'. I'm here, I'm powerful, and I'm terrifying. Trunks. What's your story? Trunks gets smacked. Dumplin'. Watch the goddamn Let's Play, maggot. Chronoa. Saying, Supreme Kai of Time, every time I'm in a scene is exhausting. Just call me Chronoa for simplicity's sake. Now go fight evil doers. Dumplin'. Balin. Tawa. I'm an evil demon scientist. I'm also incredibly why. Dumplin'. Humina. Tawa. Ha, you're funny. Tawa. You destroyed all my plans, you bastard. Dumplin'. Sorry about that. Wanna get married? Tawa. Why not? Here comes the bride. Tawa. Hey, Dumplin', want to watch me make something cool? Dumplin'. You bet. Lightning crash. Baby blob Puddin'. Naya. Dumplin'. She's adorable. Tawa. That is absolutely not what I meant to make. Trunks. What is that thing? Dumplin'. She's our daughter, maggot. We are a big happy family. Tawa. Yeah, no. Baby blob Puddin'. Naya. I'm gonna perform a magic trick. Super Mario power-up sound. Kid Puddin'. Singing I'm a big kid now. Pata. Hi Puddin'. I'm Pata, a cadet time patroller. Kid Puddin'. Awesome. Can we be friends? Pata. Even better. We can be pseudo-siblings and do a bunch of happy sibling things together while the editor of this story ships us relentlessly. Kid Puddin'. Yay. Editor. Boo. Kid Puddin' and Pata. Let's train. Punosa. Sorry, kid. You can't train. Kid Puddin'. F#K. Punosa. You need to get in control of that strength of yours. Dumplin'. Done. Time door slams closed, but then opens to show grown-up Puddin'. Puddin'. Ready to train now. Punosa and Pata. Awesome. Editor. Ship. Author. Number. Puddin. Sports break. Take me out to the ballgame. Puddin hits a home run. Puddin. Oh no, I hit the dragon. Punosa. Oh no, she hit the dragon. Dragon. Why am I even here? Daily. You beat me in baseball. That makes you my greatest enemy. Puddin. Who are you again? Jingle Bell Rock. Puddin. And a Merry Christmas to everyone. Tawa. I'm too evil for families and Christmas. I'm leaving. Puddin and Dumplin. Wait, what? Tawa. I'm alright gone. Door slams. Puddin. Mom. Dumplin. Bitch. Sad music plays. In the time nest. Author. Okay Punosa. Dumplin's drunk and Puddin's depressed, so here's a POV chapter for you. Punosa. Am I major character now? Author. Yes. Editor. Ship. Author. Number. Punosa. Go home you're drunk. Dumplin. I'm not that drunk. Hiccup. Silence. Dumplin. Fine. Sad music still playing. Dumplin. I got over myself, so don't worry, Puddin. We'll be okay. The two of us will get through this together. Puddin. I know, Daddy. Pause for a moment to absorb the feels. Punosa and Pata. We're here too. Silence. School bell rings. Author. Daily, here's POV chapter. I made you to suck at life for my amusement. Dance for me, fool. Daily. Ha ha, I must be a major character. See that Puddin? I am your rival. Now we can finally be together, in battle. Puddin. Seriously, who the fizzituck are you? Daily. But I am the great, amazing, super special awesome, wonderful, handsome, formidable, powerful, unforgettable. Author, editor, audience, and dragon, nobody cares. A year and a half had passed since that Christmas and Puddin and her father had set about rebuilding their lives. They knew that Tawa was not coming back, so they looked to the future. Puddin focused on her training and her studies, quickly shooting to the upper ranks of many of her classes, like sparring, advanced history, super advanced history, and applied quantum chronal physics. While Dumplin flew about the time stream on missions, Puddin was hitting the books, training with Pata, or hanging out with her friends. They did their best to ignore Christmas when it came again, and Puddin studied through the next Christmas. She had the Time Patroller license test on her mind. She spent 6 months of long nights, countless pages of scribbled over notes, and a practical ocean's worth of coffee to get prepared for her test. There was no time for Christmas. The test was broken up into a written portion and physical portion, and both were intensive in their own way. To pass the written test, Puddin had to know her history. She had to really know her history. She needed to memorize every detail of all the historical events of Universe 7 and a great many of the more obscure events as well, sometimes down to the second. If Vegeta and Nappa landed on Earth a minute earlier, or if Goku took even 5 seconds longer teleport an exploding cell away, the entire planet would have been doomed. Stupid heroes and their stupid last-minute entrances. Didn't they have any respect for people who had to study this kind of crap? Beyond that, the physical portion was a no-holds-barred sparring match against Master Punosa until her teacher felt satisfied. When she took the test, the battle lasted for almost an hour, pushing Puddin's strength, speed, and endurance to their very limit, before Punosa called an end to the match. Puddin thought she had done pretty well, managing to work in a few signature moves she had come up with by watching kung fu movies, but Puddin didn't get any immediate feedback from Punosa. The Majin master had then left to deliberate with the other masters without another word spoken to Puddin. With nothing else to be done about it, Puddin went home and slept. For 16 hours straight. She woke up the next morning knowing that her results would come that very day, and she was as tense as could be. Her father was away on a mission with Trunks, so there was nothing to distract her from imagining the worst possible outcome. She thought back to her performance over and over, finding more uncertainties every time she did so. Had she correctly explained the cultural impact of Majin Buu? Had she messed up her short essay about the history of the Kais? Had she blown the key portion of her combat test because she found it impossible to produce an energy blast that was weaker than planet-breaking? It had made her hiss in anger and curse her ridiculously large energy supply. Why is so difficult to be so awesome? After the second straight hour of pacing, Puddin finally decided that she needed to go out and get some air. She left the house and began to aimlessly wander around Canton City. Turning down random streets and taking odd corners, Puddin tried to take her mind off of her test. She eventually sat herself down at a cafe she was familiar with, hoping that some tea with cream, or, more accurately, some cream with tea, would help her calm down. She ordered and sipped at her cup of tea, feeling the slightest bit of tension bleed out of her shoulders. When she was considering ordering another cup, her phone buzzed. Puddin almost jumped into the air but restrained herself at the last second. Shaking her head to clear it, she took out her phone and read the update. It was a message saying, "Come see me at the Time Nest," from Master Punosa. Puddin felt a shudder traveled up her spine as her stomach fell to the floor. This was it. She had failed the test and, if that wasn't enough, Master Punosa wanted to record it for the rest of history to know. It was with a heavy heart that Puddin trudged up the steps toward the Time Nest, her shoulders sagging so much that she was almost bent over. When she reached the Time Nest, she was surprised to find not only Master Punosa but also Kronoa and Elder Kai in attendance. Puddin blinked and shifted awkwardly. "So," she said slowly, "is this the part where you tell me I failed?" Everyone looked taken aback. "What?" asked Punosa. "Of course not. Why would you think that? We're here to congratulate you." "See? Congratulate me," Puddin said dumbly. "Indeed," said Kronoa with a wide smile. "As of 8:13 this morning, you are an official member of the Time Patrol." Puddin's jaw dropped and she almost dropped with it. She passed. She passed. Woohoo! She cried, leaping into the air and soaring around the library, continuing to cheer at the top of her lungs. Punosa let her have a few moments of glee before stretching her arm up and dragging Puddin back down to solid ground. "I know you're excited, kiddo, but the celebration will need to come later. We've got a mission for you." "A mission already?" asked Puddin, her smile beaming so bright it seemed to light up the room. She almost took off again out of joy, but Punosa kept her grip on her student, keeping her grounded. "Normally there's a little more pomp and circumstance to this," said Elder Kai, "but we're short on time." He turned to the table behind the three of them. "Now then, we believe you will be needing something better in the way of protection, so your father had this made for you." He picked up a metal box and held it out to her. The top opened to show a whirlpool of neon fabric and armor. Puddin pulled it out to see it was a recreation of her father's hard armor fitted for her size. With a blur of motion, she had snatched the box out of Elder Kai's hands and zoomed into a nearby restroom. She returned moments later dressed in her new outfit, looking like the most garishly dressed Power Ranger that had ever existed. It was perfect. "Naya, I love it," she cheered, leaping into the air. "Anyway," said Elder Kai, looking impatient as he held a belt out to her. "This belt features your locator, temporal communication relay, and numerous pouches for everything you might need." The belt had thoughtfully been made pink, so she didn't hesitate to buckle it around herself. The belt also comes with a device to screen your power level to a specified amount, helping you blend in with the surrounding fighters. Puddin nodded in understanding. "What's next?" she asked. "This is particularly important," said Elder Kai as he picked up a small sideways cylinder on a necklace. There were small hatches on both ends of the cylinder. The left side of this capsule holds an emergency senzu bean, in case you need a quick heal and recharge in a fight. The right side holds a pill of ultra cyanide for you to take in the event that you are likely to be captured. Please try not to mix them up. We lose a lot of time patrollers that way. Said Puddin as she took the necklace with a look of discomfort. Did you mean your left or my? Finally, interrupted Elder Kai, we have your scouter. He held the headset out to her before she took it and affixed it to the side of her head. That's our main way of seeing and hearing what's going on whenever you are. Please, for all of our sakes, try not to break it. Don't worry too much if it does, though, Punosa said with a smile. Elder Kai shot her a look, but he was soundly ignored. The relay on your belt can act as an emergency communicator if your scouter is ever broken or deactivated. Good thing too. I'm pretty sure those things are made of really weak stuff. Like balsa wood. Or radits. Speaking of, said Kronoa, we should get on with the mission briefing. From behind her back, Kronoa pulled out a corrupted time scroll and unrolled it on the table. Puddin stepped closer to get a clearer look. The scroll showed a pitched battle between Goku and his brother Raditz while Piccolo stood off to the side, charging his desperation move. Like in Baseline, the fight was not going well for Goku and Piccolo. This time, however, Raditz had glowing red eyes and gave off a dark aura, not unlike a corrupted time scroll. That's not normal, Puddin said, narrowing her eyes at the moving image. It most certainly is not, said Kronoa. An outside force is giving Raditz a boost of power that will allow him to win this fight. She gave Puddin a confident look. This is your first mission, Puddin, but I have high hopes for your success. All you need to do is make sure the battle ends with the baseline result. All minor wrinkles will be smoothed out when the time warp fades away. Meaning it will be like I was never there, Puddin finished. Exactly, Kronoa said with a nod. She rolled up the time scroll and held it out to Puddin. We'll be in contact through your scouter, but what happens during the fight is up to you. Good luck. Puddin nodded and took the scroll from Kronoa. She desperately tried to keep her hands from trembling. She mustn't have done a good job because she felt Punosa's hand fall on her shoulder and give her a comforting squeeze. Hey, no sweat, kiddo, she said with a smile. Fighting off Raditz is the best possible mission you could have for your first time. You've got this. Puddin let out a long breath before nodding at her master. I've got this. You sure do, Punosa said with a laugh. She stepped back towards the table before setting a bright crystal on a wire-frame stand. It suddenly burst into light and projected an image of the room they were already in. And Punosa's back. Puddin moved her head experimentally and found that the crystal was projecting whatever her scouter was looking at. Neat, she said with a grin. Punosa touched the crystal and leaned close. Comm systems check. Puddin heard her master from her scouter as well as her other ear. Is this coming through loud and clear? I can hear you just fine, master, Puddin said with a nod. Taking another deep breath, she tightened her hand around the corrupted time scroll. Well, here I go, she said as light consumed her, launching her back through the time stream toward her first mission. Age 761. Puddin had hoped to arrive in the past with a triumphant pose, or perhaps an amazing one-liner that would show she meant business. If nothing else, she would settle for a simple, silent glare that promised great pain to whoever stood in her way. What she got was unexpectedly appearing 15 feet off the ground and barely having a moment to realize her situation before falling on her ass. Damn it, damn it, damn it, she muttered to herself, rubbing her backside as she stood up. Wasted such a great entrance. Dad would be ashamed. No, he wouldn't, came Punosa's voice over the scouter. She sounded like she was trying not to laugh. Chin up, it happens to everyone. Now, I believe you have a job to do. Puddin blinked and focused on where she was. She stood in the middle of an empty field, home only to a crater, a pod-shaped spacecraft, and the three figures in front of her. Goku and Piccolo were both on the ground, looking thoroughly beat up, while Raditz had nary a speck of dirt on him. The child Gohan was unconscious a few meters away. Puddin's mind came to a screeching halt. This was different than seeing footage of famous fights. This was more than learning about them in the classroom. She was actually here with the actual Goku and Piccolo. This was amazing. Who the hell are you? Demanded Piccolo. What the hell are you? Demanded Raditz. And why are you covered in paint? Asked Goku. Puddin gave them a grin of needle-sharp teeth. Well, she said lightly, in order, I'm Puddin, I'm the Majin girl that's gonna kick your butt, and these are the colors of my family and are not paint. Don't trust her, Piccolo. Shouted Goku. She's got one of those eye thingies. She must be with Raditz. You're a goddamn idiot, Kakarot, Raditz moaned, slapping his forehead. Hundreds of groups have these scouters. You can get them easily. You can literally pick them up at the Space Walmart. Back to the point, said Puddin as she leveled a finger at Raditz, I'm here to stomp you into the ground. Oh, I get it. Said Goku, grinning. You must be a warrior from a race that fights with the Saiyans all the time. No, you idiot, said Piccolo. She's clearly part of a race the Saiyans conquered and is a resistance fighter trying to stop them from getting a foothold here. Actually, said Puddin with a shrug, I just don't like his face. There was a long moment of silence. Well, you too, bitch, roared Raditz as he lunged straight at her. He had his fist back and swung right at her face. Puddin was a little disappointed how easy his blow was to stop, catching his fist in her hand. Raditz's mouth dropped open and his eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. She grinned at him. Nice punch, she said. Mind if I try? The uppercut she hit him with must have felt like Shenron's baseball bat to the Saiyan conqueror. Blood flew from his mouth as he went flying into the air, blasting a hole through a cloud as he did so. He soon flew far enough away that he was lost to sight, but a tiny dust cloud in the distance heralded his landing place. Puddin grinned before placing a kiss on her knuckles. Never gets old, she said. Puddin crossed her arms, settled her back against a nearby tree, and waited. Eventually, Raditz slowly flew back to their battleground, holding what was likely an incredibly bruised jaw. You bish, he muttered. It sounded like he had bitten his tongue as well. So I've been told, Puddin said with a grin. She stood up and got into a fighting stance. Care to try again? You're really strong, said Raditz. UWOU, make strong, Saiyan babies. Puddin stared, dumbstruck, before a shiver of revulsion traveled up her spine. Her eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. Yup, you're gonna die, she hissed. The next thing Raditz knew, his body was bent around the arm Puddin had just used to clothesline him. Puddin immediately grabbed his foot and slammed him into the ground over and over. This is what you get, Puddin yelled. Recruit, Elder Kai said over Puddin's scouter. You might want to take it a little easier on him. He's fine, snarled Puddin. She kicked Raditz in the ribs, punting him across the ground and into a nearby hill, where he ended up embedded in the rock wall. Seriously, Puddin, said Kronoa. If you kill him, everything is gonna be worse. I'm not gonna kill him, Kronoa, Puddin said as she stomped toward where Raditz lay. I just want to make him pay for his crimes. Which ones? Asked Punosa. The ones against me, of course. Puddin snapped. She stopped her advance when she towered over Raditz. With a scowl of disgust on her face, she grabbed him by the ankle and lifted him off the ground. I wanna ride the space pony, whimpered the Saiyan warrior, a far cry from making the malicious speeches that were part of the original timeline. Honestly, this is becoming less cathartic the longer it goes on, thought Puddin as she rolled her eyes. Turning slightly, she heaved Raditz high into the air. When he comes back down, I'll call it a day and finish up the special beam cannon. Suddenly, a yellow spear of ki flew from below and pierced right through Raditz's chest. Puddin blinked in surprise as Raditz's lifeless body fell to the cracked earth at her feet. There were a few beats of silence. Oh crap, she said to herself, feeling a very different tingle travel along her spine. Oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. What the heck did you do? Elder Kai screamed over the scouter. Puddin', said Punosa. What? The. Puddin' started wringing her hands and bouncing on her feet, her heart hammering at a mile a minute. She looked in every direction, desperately trying to think of a solution. Don't worry, master. I can fix this. I swear. Well, you better think fast. Piped up Chronoa. That time warp is gonna be getting worse by the second if you don't get a move on. Yes, ma'am, squeaked Puddin'. Her eyes landed on Goku, who was sitting on the ground and breathing hard. An idea formed in her head as she ran over to him. Mr. Goku, I need you for a moment, she called. What for? Goku asked as he slowly stood up. It's something really important, Puddin' said, taking his arm and pulling him closer to Raditz's body. Her gaze darted back and forth between Goku and his brother's corpse, trying to get them properly lined up. Eventually, she was satisfied that Goku was in the correct spot. She nodded to herself and looked up at Goku. Mr. Goku, I'm really sorry about this. Sorry about Shunk. The rest of Goku's question was lost in the wet sound of Puddin' thrusting her fist and forearm straight through his chest and out the other side. Goku coughed up a gob of blood before Puddin' pushed him off of her arm and down to the ground, where he lay still. Puddin' let out a relieved sigh. Mission accomplished, she said. She flicked some blood off her arm before turning to face Piccolo, now noticeably paler than before. She gave him a smile that showed off her sharp teeth. You didn't see anything. Got it. GG, got it. Piccolo stuttered. Puddin' nodded, still smiling, before she rested her clean hand on her hips and let her face turn serious. Here's the dealio, she said. There are 2 more Saiyans on their way to Earth right now. They'll be here in about a year. You have until then to take Gohan, she said, pointing to the unconscious child, and train him up to be a proper fighter. Got it. Piccolo didn't vocalize a response, but he did manage to nod his understanding. Good. Now I gotta get going. Puddin' reached for her belt and activated the recall device. Lights wrapped around her before she was transported through space and time. She hoped everyone wouldn't be too mad at her. High in the air and concealed from view by a small cloaking device, another Saiyan smiled as he watched the time patroller disappear, leaving a terrified Piccolo all alone. That had been such an interesting and brutal fight to watch. Such a fascinating combatant, Turles thought to himself with a smile. And murdering Kakarot like that? Exquisite. I think I'm going to like this one, the Saiyan pirate said to the Namekian next to him. There's just something about her. His companion nodded in agreement. Indeed. But we should go, Lord Slug rumbled. The other fighters will be here soon. Good point, answered Turles. Besides, I think our dear friend will be interested in hearing about this new time patroller. Without another word, the 2 interlopers vanished. Puddin' appeared back in the main room of the time nest and was instantly confronted with her 3 superiors. Elder Kai was practically hopping mad while Chronoa and Punosa just had their hands on their hips and expressions of extreme disappointment on their faces. Well, Puddin' tried to say. I fixed it, right? Indeed, you did, Chronoa said with a nod, but you came very close to unraveling things. She sighed before walking forward to take the time scroll from Puddin'. I will admit that you stopped things from getting worse, Punosa said, rubbing a hand down her face. At the very least, you showed you can think on your feet. Puddin' allowed herself to feel a bit of hope. However, continued Punosa, squashing Puddin's hope, you will one day find that quick thinking will not be enough to salvage a mission. Puddin's head dropped dejectedly. She whispered, I'm sorry. Sorry isn't good enough, snapped Elder Kai. I hate to admit it, but he's right, said Chronoa from where she was replacing the scroll. She turned to face them all and put her hands behind her back. You came too close to disaster today, Puddin'. Puddin stole a look up at Punosa and it hurt to see her teacher look so disappointed. Puddin looked sadly down at the floor again. She wanted to melt into a puddle right then and there. Maybe she could stay like that for a few centuries. As of now, said Cronoa in a firm voice, you're on probation status. You'll need to show that you can take this job seriously before we can restore you to a full-time patroller rank. What? Squeaked Puddin, whirling to face the supreme Kai of time. But being a time patroller is the only thing I've ever wanted. It's all I can do. Then you need to think, said Punosa, drawing Puddin's gaze. You need to be aware. If you can't do that, then no amount of strength will help you accomplish your mission. Punosa let out a long breath and turned to set her hands on the table. Take some time to meditate on that. You're dismissed. Master, I said, snapped Punosa, dismissed. Puddin desperately tried to still her quivering lip as she stood up straight, bowed to her superiors, and walked out of the time nest. She had achieved her lifelong dream only to have it blow up in her face. She made her way home, hating herself with every step.